This is Still on Health with Mario Nass. Envisioned by the people, voiced by the people, powered by the people. It's everyday people with extraordinary values that make up New Right Network. Welcome to the healthcare voice of New Right Network. This is Stealth on Health, and I'm Mario Nasinovich. And joining me for episode number 10 is an award-winning and experienced leader in innovation strategy, management, and infrastructure, as well as the creator of the innovation lifecycle paradigm. She has extensive experience in digital health, including telehealth, and she is quite passionate about the way it will continue to transform healthcare. She has been the founder and CEO of a boutique consulting firm, Health Innovation Strategies, and was the first Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Children's Hospital and Kaiser Permanente's first Vice President of Innovation and Advanced Technology. She was recruited to Biogen, a pharmaceutical company, to become their VP of Innovation and External Partnerships and to lead their innovation beyond the molecule digital health strategy. She graduated at the top of her class from UC Berkeley with a degree in chemistry and has her PhD from MIT in material science engineering. Welcome to the 10th episode of Stealth on Health, Dr. Naomi Fried.
Thank you, Mario. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here today. And I'm very impressed with how much research you've already done about my background. And I'm delighted to speak with you about digital health and healthcare innovation.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. I have certainly been a fan, a devoted follower on all of your channels, and have read all of your articles and have been inspired by them. And think for our viewers, they're really going to be enjoying this journey together into some things that they may know a little bit about. We'll be providing clarification, but for the things that they don't know about, both about you and the industry, I think this is going to really be that seminal moment for a lot of people when it comes to digital health and innovation. So tune in, get some comfort food, and lock and load here with us today because we've got a big treat for you. We're going to start off by going back in history just a couple of years. Naomi, you were writing an article in 2018 entitled Unlocking the Exploding Field of Digital Health, a Framework for Understanding Digital Health. And you opened the article by simply stating a very complex statement. And I want to say it's almost prophetic. In the next few years, our health experiences will be radically different. And I couldn't think of a better way to start off our time together in this interview than asking you, did you ever expect we would be experiencing what we're experiencing right now and for all this to come about so quickly?
Well, it's a great question, Mario. And the short answer is no. But the longer answer is that I expected that eventually healthcare would embrace digital health, and that's what the article was about, that digital health is an inevitable transformation in the direction that healthcare has to move. I thought at the time it would happen incrementally. We'd be constantly struggling to get people to focus on digital health innovation. We'd be constantly selling the value, always vying for resources, for pilots. But with the coronavirus, with COVID-19, we've seen a discontinuous radical transformation, a radical acceleration and adoption of digital health. Sort of draw on my days as a chemist, this has been sort of a catalytic change. It's happening fast and hot with low activation barriers. And you know, Mario, I've been advocating for telehealth for over 15 years.
Yes, you have.
When I was at Kaiser Permanente, I launched the telehealth strategy there, and that organization went on to really start doing wonderful things. And I'm really, from a telehealth perspective, excited to see all the virtual visits that are happening everywhere as a result of COVID-19. Even remote monitoring, which had been happening in the home, is now happening in the hospital. And also this notion of hospital at home, and that people can really be cared for at home and supported at home with digital solutions, is really becoming popular. And I'll just say that I personally find it exciting and exhilarating, and I would say the silver lining to the COVID-19 pandemic.
And certainly no shortage of people with Zoom fatigue or chronic fatigue from this type of interaction. But I could just imagine what it would be like if we did not have this and did not have the access to the brilliant minds and the medical technology that we currently have today. Where would people be in a situation where they need to shelter in place without it? But before we advance our discussion any further, let's ensure our viewers are aligned to where we are right now and our topic. your definition of digital health.
Ah, so digital health is an exploding field, and actually a lot of things are being called digital health today that maybe aren't necessarily digital health. So I think it is important to have a definition, and I'll share with you the one that I use and seems to really resonate with my clients, which are pharmaceutical companies and providers. So digital health leverages hardware and software to deliver care and information to patients and providers that can be more convenient, more cost effective, and more personalized. And when it comes to sort of the hardware, I'm thinking of phones, computers, sensors, wearables, robots, monitors, and software. Well, that includes apps and computer programs and games and virtual reality, chatbots. What I think is exciting about digital health, it has the potential to improve outcomes, decrease cost, enhance efficiency, and also to deliver care in fundamentally new ways that aren't possible in the non-digital world.
So I hope everybody's taking notes because there is going to be a digital health quiz after this. And we certainly want you to take this all in. And I invite you to take some notes. And if you have some questions for your own healthcare practitioner based on what your engagement has been as you've been sheltering in place and from our discussion here, bring that up to your healthcare practitioner. Ask them why you're not utilizing some of the technologies to engage. If they haven't adopted it yet, you may be the actual inspiration. You may be that catalyst that Naomi just talked about in terms of helping them convert. Certainly, there were many early adopters in this process a decade ago, 15 years ago. Now it's no longer optional. And let's talk about that because I think in 2018, in that same article that you wrote, you shared another incredible pearl and very prophetic. In short, digital health will be the dominant form of non-acute care. Can you discuss how this prophecy here has also now been fulfilled and what you mean by this?
Well, prophecy, that's a pretty big word. I'm flattered that you're using that.
You are prophetic. Yeah.
I like to think of it as I'm diligent and determined, and I keep
Agreed.
going after the things. And, you know, a lot of what I was hoping to see happen is really starting to come to fruition. But anyway, so what do I see today? Well, first of all, mobile phones, I think, are really becoming the first line of care for information, for diagnosis. Chatbots are being used to answer simple questions, to get triage, to be able to interact with, a digital assistant rather than a person. There's an app I was reading about for determining if you have COVID-19 based on your symptoms. Obviously, that's not a full diagnostic, but it's something that's great to put in people's hands to reassure them or to encourage them to go get professional care. Remote patient monitoring for many chronic conditions, from congestive heart failure to COPD, is really in the fore now. And the power of these tools is it allows doctors to collect valuable information between visits about patients from home, and this information is collected digitally, and I would propose probably more accurately than self-reported data.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really seeing virtual visits because, again, of the coronavirus explode, and I saw an estimate that there will be 1 billion virtual visits in 2020 in the US.
Wow. Was that before or after the pandemic?
No, that's as a result of the pandemic.
As a result of,
it's not before.
I'm going to say, wow.
A different trajectory.
Yeah.
And I think, telehealth is actually, again, because of the pandemic, the only way many specialists are actually seeing their patient today. When I was at Boston Children's Hospital 7 years ago, we set up a teledermatology pilot program to support primary care doctors who needed advice from dermatologists, and the pediatric dermatologists were extremely busy. So this was a great way to send them pictures and have, an asynchronous virtual interaction. I have to say I got a kick when a couple of weeks ago, my dermatologist called me to offer now a teledermatology appointment. So I think we're seeing, clinicians rushing forward to embrace these types of digital health solutions. And I will say that for the younger generation that love technology and that live on technology, they are really excited to be offered all of these new tools and opportunities.
So we're at I don't even want to dare say a tipping point because perhaps the best is yet to come. So tell us a little bit about the tremendous potential and transformation of digital solutions that still can be brought to healthcare, and where do we go from here in terms of non-acute care specifically?
So I think the biggest growth opportunity in telehealth, and I wrote about this in one of my recent articles, is really around digital health diagnostics. I
Mm-hmm.
think this is where the field is really booming. It's possible now to get your Parkinson's disease diagnosed based on your typing patterns. And this is algorithm and a platform has been developed by NQ Medical. So whether you're typing on a keyboard, typing on a phone, they can figure out if you have Parkinson's or if your Parkinson's disease is progressing and how you're responding to medication. Another startup, ResApp, is diagnosing pneumonia and lower respiratory diseases based on the coughing sounds that's collected by a cell phone. I think,
And is that active or passive engagement?
well, you have to cough into the phone.
Oh, okay, okay.
So it's not passively listening, but actually, when it comes to passive listening, Sond Health has a digital solution that analyzes the state of a person's mental health. They don't listen to actually what words you're saying. They listen to the quality of your voice, and then they use digital biomarkers, and from that they are able to measure symptoms of depression, concussion, cognitive impairment. We're seeing, digital solutions that can predict epilepsy and asthma using wearables. Even cancers are starting to be screened from mobile phones. One of the solutions I think is really cool is BillyScreen, which uses a smartphone camera to detect pancreatic cancer from bilirubin levels by measuring the whites of a person's eyes. So, with pancreatic cancer, bilirubin's levels rise over time, and eventually the whites of the eyes turn yellow. But by the time yellowing is visible to the naked eye, the cancer is usually pretty advanced. So BillyScreen actually detects very low levels of bilirubin, indicating possible disease, and it allows for earlier, easier, cheaper detection of pancreatic cancer. And I say you asked about acute care, non-acute care, but I just want to also add that I think when it comes to acute care, digital health is starting to have a significant impact. There are virtual consultations between doctors, around patients that are in hospital. And even surgery, we're going to see more and more of it done virtually when a doctor is in one location and the patient in the other, because we have digital tools. So I think that, there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of excitement that and ways that digital health is changing the delivery of healthcare.
Now, to try and just wrap our heads around all of these amazing advancements, you've come up with a structure to help us navigate the myriad of choices that make up a patient's healthcare journey. And while every individual patient is an N of one, I believe that. What are the types of solutions or categories as you see it?
So I've been trying to wrap my head around what I consider an exploding field, and I thought that really we needed some structure for categorizing patient-facing digital health, and I have structure for other non-patient facing. But when it comes to patient-facing digital health, I think there's four main categories that almost every type of digital health can be divided into. So the first one is what I call clinical grade digital information, and these are the diagnosis and evaluation tools that I was just talking about, where clinical grade information is collected from or about the patient that allows a physician to actually make a decision that's actionable from a medical perspective. The second big category is virtual patient care, which everyone's becoming familiar with now because of COVID-19. This is telehealth, this is remote monitoring. It's really the delivery of care virtually rather than in person. The third area is one that I think is really exciting and people are a little less familiar with. It's digiceuticals. And these are digital pharmaceuticals or digiceuticals. And they're digital therapies that are administered through apps or games or software to actually treat a patient's condition or disease. And we're seeing digiceuticals for depression, for attention deficit disorder, for insomnia, pain, addiction. For more and more conditions, we're going to be able to say there's an app for that. And then the last category that I think about is medication compliance, which is huge and so important to outcomes. And these are apps, sensors, games, even ingestibles, something you swallow, that remind patients to take medication and also provide doctors with information about compliance. I think that digital health has potential to make adherence to medications easier and maybe even more fun for patients.
I had the privilege several years ago to work on a number of projects for that very special, and we won't name them here, but that very special app that is now a game that is being used as a digiceutical. And I can tell you that it was science fiction then, but I'm certainly happy it's reality now, because certainly with those specific attention deficit children, this is something that can definitely help. And what I think I want to share with our viewers as well at this point, it's an important point of clarification. These are not just games. And while I remember my mom when we first launched the Nintendo DES and got that in our home, and I was using all the cheat codes for Contra to get unlimited lives, it wasn't about me spending hours and hours and hours on the game and my mom telling me to get off. This is something completely different. This is actually helping to improve somebody's condition. So just like a doctor would write a prescription and your insurance will reimburse you for a prescription, this digiceutical, this digital therapeutic is actually able to be used in a very similar fashion. So this has an approval process, and the FDA certainly is reviewing and working very closely with several companies to ensure that, one, you have the outcomes that you say you do, but along the way that you do have some level of IP or patent available to you based on the algorithms, based on the actual tools that are being used. So it's a fascinating field, but I want to just caution our audience, these are not just games. These are FDA approved devices and technologies, and that's critical here too. This is not the Wild West. This isn't your snake oil salesman wheeling up the wagon and just saying words and phrases and claims. They have to go through the same rigorous process that a pharmaceutical or a biotechnology needs to go through, and that's what makes this even more special, in my opinion. It's not just someone saying that an app can do something. This is actually going through the rigors of clinical development, which is fascinating.
I think that's a great point, Mario, that real digiceuticals have data to back them up. They run clinical trials, they go for FDA approval. But you also raise a great point. They are potentially games or apps, and that makes them very approachable and usable and desirable for the patients.
And
I would
accessible
say that,
once they're
yes,
you're approved for them.
And also these digiceuticals, can be used in the privacy and comfort of people's homes. They don't have to go anywhere. They're on their phones. And so I think that helps with adoption. I think people will be eager to take an app. Parents, I think, would love the idea of a prescription app rather than a prescription drug, because drugs can have biological side effects, and by and large, digiceuticals do not. So there are a lot of benefits. I would also add they're cheaper to make. They're really
easy distribution too.
Exactly. Easy manufacture, easy distribution. So there's a lot of benefits. And this is sort of the example. These are the category of examples of things that can be delivered by digital health that are just not possible without the digital concept and framework.
It's all absolutely fascinating to me that we're at this point. More recently, over the past year, I've had the opportunity to work in the area of medical adherence, medication adherence specifically. You mentioned compliance before, and medication adherence certainly is critically important to build connections with patients, especially those going through the clinical trial setting. And nowhere do we need patients to be taking their medication as indicated to know what the potential effects are going to be, both in healthy people as well as various patients with various diseases and conditions. But I wanted to get your thought in terms of how critically important it is for us to have applications like that for medication adherence and to leverage these healthcare solutions, these digital health solutions specifically within the clinical trial setting.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think the focus really has to be on the patient and on the patient experience. I think if you're going to build any digital solution and you don't take the patient into account, you're not going to have a successful solution. And certainly for virtual clinical trials, you also need to take into account the principal investigator and just the workflow generally. And I think this is an important sort of digital health, but even I would say broader innovation principle that you need to keep in mind how the solution is going to be used, who's going to be using it, and the usability. And what's interesting is that the FDA, when they give approvals to these digital solutions, are looking at usability, which is not something traditionally for a molecule or for a drug, for a pill, that you would expect the FDA would want to know about. But when it comes to digital solutions, it is very important because they recognize if a person can't use, won't use, has difficulty using the solution, they won't actually get the benefit.
Agree. So shifting gears a little bit, you all penned another article earlier this year, and this was highlighting some trends to watch for. So again, Dr. Naomi Fried, prophetic in terms of her view of what's happening next. But you were it was very interesting here because this was specifically among an area that you know perhaps better than anyone that I know in terms of what's going to be happening next in the pharmaceutical industry and those that are interested in digital health technologies. As I think you'll agree, much has changed during this pandemic. None of us were prepared for this. What are the trends you identified then? How have they changed, paused, or how have they advanced since then?
Well, thank you for mentioning my article in January about digital health trends for 2020, and particularly in the pharmaceutical industry where I do a lot of work. So first of all, I certainly missed the coronavirus pandemic. I didn't see that one coming. But I did talk about 4 trends, and I'll share the trends with you and also sort of my update and sort of interpretation of what's happening.
Fantastic. And we'll co-author that article after this episode.
Yeah, perfect. I'd love that. So let's see, one trend was that pharmaceutical industries will continue to focus and tailor their digital health strategies by therapeutic area. So sort of moving away from big platforms for all therapies, they would really focus more on patient education, side effect management, compliance, on a therapy by therapy basis, because there actually is a lot of difference and it's not a one size fits all. And so in terms of how did I do with this, this prediction, given it was 6 months in. So I'd say there's a lot of new pharma activity around therapies and vaccines for COVID-19. So I think this prediction is still okay. I think it's in the process of playing out.
And certainly one that's going to continue. I mean, that is
yes, absolutely.
We're going to see at the end of 2020, well into 2021 as well. I don't think we're going to change from that very, very quickly.
No, and it reflects a better and more sophisticated understanding of digital health by pharma, which obviously will continue. One of my other predictions was that there will be a growing emphasis on digital health diagnostics, that those clinical grade information categories I mentioned earlier are going to become more and more important. So I think that, COVID-19 has accelerated certain diagnostics. I mentioned ResApp Health earlier, using a cell phone microphone to analyze coughing sounds. Well, now it's being used to help triage people to figure out if they actually actually have pneumonia or an exacerbation of asthma, or if they have COVID-19, and that type of triage being done in Australia, unfortunately not in the US yet.
What a pivot. That's an
Yeah,
amazing pivot.
it's a brilliant pivot. It's so helpful and it's so vital, and I hope that this comes to the US soon. Another example of digital diagnostic is NanoScent in Israel. So they have a nasal breathing test that you sort of sniff on their sensor, and they can diagnose corona in 30 seconds. So I hope we're going to see a lot of these deployed at airports and other places. We need these kinds of digital health tools. So I think, when it comes to digital diagnostics, in some ways we're going to have an exploding field. Let's see, third trend, I said I thought more startups were going to seek regulatory approval for their digital health solutions. So this is certainly happening. Digital health companies that are on the path to work with the FDA are certainly continuing on their path. I think what's changed is the FDA has become very busy with COVID-19. They, established their emergency use authorization, EUA, approvals process. So I think that on one hand, we may see a slowing down for the non-COVID-19 related digital health companies, but I think we'll also see a bump up or hopefully a speeding up of solutions that can help with COVID-19, because I think there's a crush of urgent work for the FDA now around the pandemic. My fourth prediction was that the pharma innovation challenges were going to take off this year. So as I mentioned,
like no one has ever seen.
Yeah. So, pharma is in the process of really coming to appreciate how critical digital health is to its future. And we've seen some big pharmas doing innovation challenges. Merck, Lilly, Johnson & Johnson hosted challenges last year. I think COVID-19 is going to accelerate the focus on innovation and pharma's needs and interest in partnering with digital health startups. So first of all, we've already seen COVID-19 innovation challenges. Roche Canada ran one this year.
Brilliant one, an absolute
brilliant. Really well done. We've seen a variety of other ones, but I thought that one was well executed.
Agreed.
But I think also second, because there's going to be fewer conferences, fewer meetups, fewer ways for pharma to actually connect with digital health innovators and startups and the digital health ecosystem more broadly. I think that's going to make innovation challenges a lot more important to run online. So I think we're going to actually see a lot more non-COVID-19 innovation challenges coming out of pharma this year. And my firm has actually already been engaged by a major pharma to support innovation activity planning in 2020. And I think there's going to be a lot more of this. So to summarize, I'd say we see a slowing down of FDA approval for general digital health solutions, not because of decreased demand, but just because I think they're going to be much more busy with COVID-19.
So much more because of the shift in focus.
Approvals. I think we'll continue to see the emphasis on therapeutic areas and not platforms within digital health. And I think we're going to see a lot more innovation challenges and a real focus on diagnostics.
So your firm has worked with many pharmaceutical companies, as you mentioned, on digital health strategy and innovation programs. Let's put on those glasses, that hat, that crystal ball that only you have access to. What do you see as the future for pharma when it comes to digital health beyond the immediate term?
Well, I think that we're going to see more and more engagement with digital health startups. I think that we are moving toward a world where pharma recognizes that their core offering is not just a pill or a molecule, that actually they want to offer a drug and a digital, that there's an opportunity to create more value for their patients by taking their medication and supporting it or wrapping it with a digital health solution. So I think we're just going to see an expansion of the partnering and combining of molecules and pills with digital solutions, whether they're education apps, whether they're compliance support tools, whether they are side effect monitoring and support platforms, even virtual care. It makes sense to me that pharmaceutical companies should be providing advice and access virtually to patients when they have questions about their drugs or about their side effects, and certainly during clinical trials. So I think where the future really lies is around how to think about the solution, the product that pharmaceutical companies are offering as a drug and digital combination.
No, I think you are absolutely spot on, and we'll come back and check that prophecy in a couple months and see how we're doing on those 2020 predictions if we're carrying through, and then certainly we'll check in next year to see how things are going and moving in the future. But I think everything you said here is absolutely really realistic. And I think in a lot of ways they're very time sensitive. We don't have an option here. We have to do some of these things to increase engagement, to ensure that patients are staying on therapy. And while we're always going to be talking about price in terms of acquisition cost, I think you said it best. We've got to recognize value, and the way we can recognize value is from looking at this beyond the pill. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's take a
Mario,
pause.
could I just add one thing?
Yes,
I would
please
just
do.
say, in terms of a long-term prediction, and don't come back in just a few months about this. I think the
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies that actually get this, that embrace the concept of digital health as an enabler, as an accelerant, I think they're going to transform themselves, and I think those companies will be around, and they will be the winners in the future and a couple of years from now. I think
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies that don't embrace the digital opportunity may be left behind. They'll be
Agreed.
disrupted by those that actually do engage with digital health.
And you and I have seen that in terms of the cycle of life, in terms of the pharma industry. I mean, think of those that adopted email early, in our career. Not that we're that old, I'm in denial. But those that adopted email early, and those that adopted the ability for their sales teams to begin to email healthcare practitioners early. It wasn't too long ago where, even as a young rep myself, we were not able to go beyond the confines of our ecosystem at Merck and email doctors outside of that. It was prohibited. We had policy against that, all for all the right reasons as well. I think it was a tool that needed to be understood and learned, and certainly those restrictions have been lifted with the emergence of technology and better training. But in those early days, I think it was a very cautious approach. We've also seen the adoption of product websites. As amazing as that may seem to some of our younger viewers, at one point in time, we did not have a product website for a specific pharmaceutical product. Now we've got so many websites, not only for the product, but as you said, so much supportive material, and we have apps supporting that. We've got patient level webinars that are continuing, and engagement in terms of social media. And then the social media side of it, I mean, I remember being at the forefront of that now 15 years ago or so, and just all the discussions and panel discussions and the research that was going into the ethics and the privacy issues of that. So every age in which we've advanced and now into wearables and applications, certainly we've had our challenges, but I think as we continue to advance, we're learning and adopting new ways of making things more accessible. We also are understanding the complicated regulatory pathways for some of these products to get approved. I agree with you that we're going to see more and more pursue that route. I think it does certainly ensure a lot of different things across these various countries in terms of various regulations. When you're able to say we have passed all of the standards, we have are working in compliance and under the guidance of what's available, or in some cases exceeding the guidance that's available in terms of some of our technologies. So all of this is incredibly fascinating, and certainly I'm just amazed that we have gone from, at least myself, a compact 386 computer laptop with an amber screen as my first ever laptop to now being able to have an interview with you using all the devices that were enabled in our home, and a 1,000 megabit feed on my cable, where I used to use a 300 baud modem when I was dialing up my BBS in high school. So technology has definitely been our friend. It's something to be embraced. But I think even more so, the regulations will actually help further expand and put that important imprimatur on and add a level of validation that's so required, especially when it comes to some of these tools.
Mario, I think you make a really good point about how pharma has succeeded in embracing digital on the marketing side and for communication. And it's part of an arc. The way I think of it as part of the pharma's arc, that they're now embracing digital tools for clinical trials. And then there's also this piece around sort of digital health and the interaction with the patient. And, it makes sense that they started with marketing because that's a lot easier. And, we are now ready to really embrace digital health that engages the patient and engages the clinician, but does have more complexity around regulatory requirements. And so I think it's a steady, and I hope very successful march for all of the pharmaceutical companies, but it's clear where sort of the next phase is.
And I think you're right. I think those early adopters that embrace this, and I welcome them to, take the leap. You are all about innovation, and we're going to talk a lot about that next. But I think, if you are an early adopter, if you're somebody that is truly innovative, yes, you're not taking blind leaps of faith. You're mitigating your risks along the way, but you've got to take that risk. These things have not been done before. And what's critical is that somebody is there, if it is somebody who is dedicated to innovation, is to look at every aspect, every angle of this, as you have personally, and be able to weigh what the potential risks are and then to take them. Because the only way we get there is if somebody tries. And if we try and fail, well, then we'll take those lessons learned and try something else. But we've got to put some level of risk in this. And I think now more than ever in the world that we're living in, we are hopefully going to see some of those investments. Those challenges help. I think we've got some incredibly innovative ideas that are coming out of some of those challenges, as you spoke. And for our sake and for all of humanity going forward, we need the types of people with the vision that you've had, that some of your clients had, to save our lives. We're going to need this. We're going to need people that are really looking towards what we can do and how, as opposed to what we can't do and we're not going to consider. So I think that's a different conversation. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. And hopefully you can influence them and continue to influence them the way you have throughout your career. And that's where I'd like to go next. So we're going to go take a way back before Dr. Fried could even think about all of these trends and futuristic approaches. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't believe you know how much Naomi has literally made history, and she's had such an incredible amount of notable firsts in her career. And I've got to ask you, because I am just so curious, which was the most rigorous part of your professional journey? And which first, because you've got so many, do you embrace as the one that's had the greatest impact on you personally and professionally?
All right, Mario, that's a hard question.
I didn't say this was going to be easy.
I know. I feel like you're asking which of my children do I love the most. Like,
yes.
Whatever my best favorite first.
Yes. They always ask, though, no matter what age.
Yeah. So I think I learned and I grew in each role and had really different experiences. I think that so when my entry into innovation was at Kaiser Permanente, where they created this new role, Vice President of Innovation and Advanced Technology, and I led a group of doctors and nurses and technologists, and we were busy evaluating emerging technology outside the organization and bringing it in. So this was my first role leading innovation, and I did a lot of learning actually at that time and thinking.
A lot of listening, right?
Yes, trying to understand what is this innovation, how does it work, and that's actually when I developed the innovation life cycle. It was from my time at Kaiser trying to help advance innovation, but also create a framework for understanding how innovation was happening. So I think that was an amazing first for me. But then I went on to become the first chief innovation officer at Boston Children's Hospital, and the first chief innovation officer at any pediatric hospital, I think possibly at any hospital in the US. So the good news is I knew something about innovation at that point from my work at Kaiser. What was exciting for me about working at Boston Children's Hospital was working in an academic medical center where there were so many people engaged with research and so many people that wanted to be innovators. It was extremely stimulating for me personally. It was also where I built a digital health accelerator. I was starting to realize that there was this whole exploding field and we needed to start being responsive to the solutions that doctors and nurses wanted to build, and they needed resources. And so it was incredibly gratifying to be able to build that kind of capability and to really launch the digital health accelerator. What was wonderful about being the first vice president of innovation external partnership at Biogen was, again, for me personally, to really get a chance to get inside of the biopharma community and actually to learn
Which
so much
operates like nothing else on the planet.
So that was the big surprise and the big learning. I thought, well, I've been in healthcare for many years. It's another healthcare organization, but it's truly unique. So much to do with the regulatory environment, but actually they have, and you know this, Mario, because you've worked in it, they have their own language and you have to learn a new language. So I found that very
Those that are listening,
gratifying.
it's comparable to Klingon. That's the language that the aliens use in Star Trek. So if you can understand Klingon, you're a big Star Trek fan, you may be able to work in pharma. They should actually have that in the job descriptions. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, you are spot on. So, that was very gratifying, and to be able to be among the first people to talk about the notion of innovation beyond the molecule and the importance of digital health and to start applying it within a pharmaceutical company was really gratifying. So, today I'm running my own consulting firm, and I have the pleasure of working with, a diversity of clients, working on multiple projects, doing a lot of speaking and writing. But I think it's really, it's a wonderful opportunity to just share all of these learnings that I've collected over the years to provide guidance and hopefully direction to my clients to really accelerate their work in digital health and their innovation, and to learn from me, to learn from my mistakes. I'm not shy about telling people what doesn't work. So I think that I'd like to think that I've taken all of my firsts and I'm helping to sort of propagate them and share those learnings with others.
No, and there's certainly no hesitation. I've always been inspired. A very good friend of mine, his name is Dr. Robert Osher. He's a world-renowned cataract surgeon out of Cincinnati in Ohio. And no matter where I traveled across the globe for any of the ophthalmology conferences and cataract surgery conferences, you could see Dr. Osher in a setting where either he was the person who was chairing a panel where everyone was sharing their mistakes and lessons learned, or he himself was putting himself out there saying, hey, this is everything I've done wrong. And I just think that it's incredibly admirable where we have innovation that people are so willing to share, and this is what went wrong and this is why, and you don't have to make the same mistake I made. You can take this from this point and make this better. And I think that is really something that's beautiful, and I think is a very important message for anyone that is motivated to be part of emerging technologies or innovation, that they understand that it's okay and acceptable to make mistakes. You're probably going to make more because you are on the cutting edge and it's never been done before, but also to embrace it and to be able to communicate it, because someone else can learn from those mistakes and perhaps address it, or take it from the point of the mistake that you've made and maybe abandon to go into another direction and take that forward in a different way. And we've seen that in pharma and work absolutely beautifully with failed drugs and failed technologies, and people being able to say, well, wait, I think we can do this with this. And certainly we wouldn't be where we are with the hundreds of potential treatments for COVID-19 if we thought that we were going to start from the position of we have a product for COVID-19. The first thing a lot of the companies actually have done is go back in terms of their massive libraries and look at is what has worked in other areas that are similar to this, and let's see if this works. And ultimately, whether it be the vaccines or the treatments or even some of the diagnostics, we're going to fail more often than we're going to be successful. So I think it's important to try and to report about what that is and to be transparent and to be proud. You took the risk. So I want to talk about that, and I think that's such an important part for people to understand. You know, we've got people that are TikTok and Instagram famous these days, and that's important to so many people to project an image of something that they're not. Authenticity seems to be put on the shelf sometimes. But in prior interviews, you have shared some thoughts on your work, both as an entrepreneur, as a person who has accomplished so many firsts. Your comfort with innovation and with risk. And for me, I would love to know, how does that comfort continue to fuel you today?
Yeah, so I think that comfort with risk is absolutely vital. It's a core principle when it comes to innovation. And just sort of thinking about, again, the pandemic, we face an unprecedented threat, I feel. And for most of us, this is the first real public health crisis in our lifetime. And it requires not just new solutions, but even new ways of living. And so I think it's innovation that actually will ultimately rescue us from the coronavirus pandemic. It's going to be what's going to allow us to get back to a normal way of life, whether it's having meetings, conferences, social interactions, even traveling safely on planes or public transportation. So I think that, you know, this is the time more than ever to embrace innovation, which is going to bring us ultimately, hopefully, treatments and vaccines, new ways to detect diseases, but also new ways to interact with each other in safe and socially distant ways until we have those therapies and vaccines. And, you know, innovation's already produced, you know, telehealth, which has become a very important healthcare delivery tool. Yeah. But, you know, innovation is a process of trying new things when you don't know if they're going to succeed or not.
A process of elimination.
The process of trial and error, success and failure, you know, it really has to do with risk. And I think if you're not taking risk, you can't have any reward. If you know what you're doing is going to succeed, it's actually by definition not innovation. So I feel like in some ways we're going through a global lesson in the appreciation of the power of innovation and the need to get comfortable with risk. I think this is an amazing learning opportunity for the world about the value innovation can bring to our lives and the power that it has to change for good. And that's, again, sort of how I'm hoping to harvest some goodness from really a very sad and tragic healthcare crisis.
I think that's the silver lining that you mentioned earlier. Naomi, I can't believe it's taken us this long to get to this question. You mentioned it briefly a couple minutes ago, and we got onto the whole risk and comfort conversation. But I want to ask right now, at the onset of our discussion, we talked a little bit about your proven process that's certainly been tested against hundreds of innovation projects. Tell us about your healthcare innovation lifecycle paradigm and what it has truly meant for the evaluation of healthcare innovation.
Sure. So thanks for asking about the innovation lifecycle.
This is truly a teachable moment, by the way. People should be taking notes on what this is.
Oh, this is one of my favorite topics. As I mentioned, when I was at Kaiser Permanente, I was trying to understand how innovation happens in healthcare. And I realized that you could sort of, that there was a life cycle. And so I created a framework to explain what I was seeing. And as you said, it's tested and it's tried and true that there are actually really 6 steps in the innovation process and a gap in the middle of those 6 steps. So the first step is really initiating. And this is when you identify the problem, the challenge, the thing that you are wrestling with. And it's really actually important to start with the problem. I've seen a lot of innovators that try to start with a solution, and that's not where the innovation life cycle starts. So when you initiate, you basically begin to think about what it is that you want to solve. You line up resources. The next stage, the second step, is ideation. And this is where you begin to think about conceptually what might be the solution to that problem that you're wrestling with. And there's many ways to ideate. There's brainstorming, there's stealing ideas from other industries. I could give a whole talk just on ideation, but what's important about the ideation step is that you harvest a single idea to move on to the next stage, which is the pilot stage. And in the pilot stage, this is when you're going to test out your new idea. You're going to build a prototype, you're going to have a mock-up, you're going to run tests. And this is where, if you're going to fail, it's going to happen here. But what I say is early fast failure is a sign of success. And I encourage people to not be down, but to pick themselves up and try again at this stage. The other, I'd say, important piece of advice is in the pilot stage, you need to know what you're measuring. You have to have clear metrics, not moving goalposts, but you need to know what it is that indicates success or failure at this stage. So after these first 3 stages, if you have a successful pilot, in the ideal world, you would go on and just tell people about this great new idea and everyone would adopt it. But Mario, we don't live in an ideal world. We live in the real world.
No, we do not.
No. And you know what happens in the real world, Mario, is that people are resistant to change, to these new ideas.
Yes,
and so what happens is a gap opens up, sort of an adoption barrier, a reluctance, a resistance. And so I've coined the term the operationalization gap, or O gap, to explain this barrier that happens. And you see O gaps primarily in large organizations with a lot of sort of diffuse leadership. And what I advise my innovators to do is to actually plan for the O gap, because what's going to help you close the O gap is getting people involved and getting them involved early on in those first 3 stages that we just talked about. If you can bring the people that are responsible for operationalization into your innovation process during ideation, during piloting, then when you have a successful pilot, they're there to embrace it. They understand what it's about. They don't have that allergic reaction. They don't feel like they're being pushed to change into something they've never heard before. And so I really advise people to shrink the O gap, to engage people that are involved in operationalization. And that's actually the next step, the 4th step on the other side of the O gap. That's when an idea becomes broadly diffused through an organization. That's not the last step. There's actually another step, which is optimization. And this is when the idea, the innovation's in the hands of the end users, and they're sort of tweaking it and really making it their own and internalizing and using it on a regular basis. And then finally, no life cycle goes on forever. The last step is really obsoleting and potentially repeating. And this is where you sort of recognize that, hey, this great idea, this innovation, it's not working for me anymore. Maybe there's new technology, maybe there's new workflow, but there's some reason we have to sort of start over again and sort of potentially sunset this innovation, and that's complicated, and begin the process again. So I think the 6 steps and the recognition of the O gap is really a powerful tool for innovators, first of all, to understand and to plan out their innovation journey. And it's also an important paradigm or framework for organizations to use to think about where to put resources and what to expect from their innovation programs.
In terms of that O gap, is there a time limit?
Well, ideally, the shorter the O gap, the better. And depending on how
revenue generation,
the more you invest, I think, early on in planning and preparing for the O gap, the smaller it can be. And that's what you really want. You want the smallest O gap. Startup companies tend not to have O gaps because they're nimble, they're fast, and they're ready to pivot, and they're ready to absorb a new idea. But for a lot of large organizations, it's really important to plan for the O gap, to plan to shrink the O gap.
I think that's an incredible message. There's also another message that you shared, and I believe this is not the only time that you shared it. An incredible statement. You said successful innovation leaders are those who are 100% focused on driving innovation. I absolutely love this statement. And I need to ask, is this your personal mantra? Are we close to that?
Yeah, so I think, when you're focused on innovation, it has to be your core objective. And, I think the best innovation leaders live and breathe innovation. They're comfortable with the uncertainty, the risk, the confusion that sometimes
Life
comes
on
with
the edge.
innovation. Yes, it's true. But surprisingly, Mario, what we see in healthcare is a lot of people are tasked with innovation and something else. And I think this is where you kind of get into problems. So, I've seen innovation and quality roles. And to me, these are two very different objectives. When it comes to quality, you are trying to usually take known best practices, whether it's hand washing or ways of, decreasing infection transmission in the hospital, and you want to implement those. There's not that uncertainty. But when it comes to innovation, you don't know if what you're trying is going to succeed. So I think pairing quality and innovation can be a little bit of a mismatch. I think an even worse mismatch is trying to ask the CFO to be your chief innovation officer.
I can't think of anything worse.
Yeah. So, innovation is all about focus on risks.
People can quote me on that. Mario Nassif, put your CFO in charge of innovation.
No, please don't, because they're all about mitigating risk and containing risk.
Yes.
And innovation officers are all about opening up and encouraging risk. So I guess the one area where I think if you have to have a second hat with your innovation hat, I would say strategy is probably the one thing that does pair nicely with innovation. And that's because I think innovation for a good organization is really long-term strategy. It's where you want the organization to be. It's how you're going to change, how you're going to transform, years out. So I think that actually can work. But I think really it's important to have as clear a focus on innovation alone as possible, and to really hone in on the successes and the failures and turning those failures into learning opportunities. I think that's what makes a great innovation leader.
I could not agree with you more. I also think that you have certainly been innovative and successful at every step of the way, taking each of those lessons learned and improving upon your own self as you've moved from organization and certainly all the firsts that you've accomplished. But I want our audience to hear a little bit about your latest adventure with Health Innovation Strategies. You've got innovation right in the name of the company. Being mindful of confidentialities that you have, any emerging areas we should also be aware of that are on the horizon. So first a bit about you, and then first about some emerging areas that we should all be aware of.
Sure. So, in terms of emerging areas, we are working with clients on building digital health programs, and more pharma in particular are starting to stand up these programs. And I think that's awesome. But these aren't just digital health programs, they're actually innovation programs. And I think it's important to think of them as innovation programs where it's not just about bringing technology solutions, digital health solutions into the organization. It's really about how to drive.
That ship has sailed in a lot of ways. I mean, that was a fascination of sorts over the last decade. We've moved from that.
Although I'd say when it comes to patient-facing digital health solutions, there's still resistance, and there's still a lot of work that I see my clients doing with their business partners to get them to engage with a digiceutical or with a new, clinical grade diagnostic. But these groups actually need to think more broadly about how to drive a culture of transformation, a culture of innovation that is digital health. And that's really what's going to support the adoption of these technologies where, people might otherwise be reluctant. And it's also really important to bring people along. It's not enough just to set up resources, say, hey, I can find you the best new, patient-facing digital health solution. You have to be able to help people understand why it's important. And communication and education are actually really important components of any innovation program. And I work with a lot of clients on this piece. The other piece, when you're thinking about, creating a culture of innovation, there's communication, there's education, and there's also celebration. And I try to encourage my clients to actually take time to celebrate the successes of their innovation program, of their digital health program. So we at Health Innovation Strategies are really focused on helping organizations with the strategies that underlie digital programs, as well as with broad healthcare innovation program and how to establish them. We support actual execution and reduction to practice, if you will, of innovation programs. We're seeing more organizations that have tried to set up digital health or innovation programs that aren't always working. We have a really strong practice area around helping people restart or optimize or redesign these programs if they're not meeting their needs. And we do a lot of coaching also on the, I would say, soft skills that are part of successful innovation in digital health programs, the socialization, the communication, the education. So, our plates are full, but I think it's such an exciting and such an important area to be supporting the creation of digital health programs and innovation programs in pharma as well as in the provider world. And we also work with payers too.
So, Naomi, I mean, you are indeed living out the title of healthcare innovation and digital health leader. I know a lot of people put that on their profiles. They are introduced by that, but you're living it, and it is in the very fabric of who you are. And certainly, you've been recognized in publications and via several awards. But I'm just so curious because I don't know the answer to this, and I don't know many people outside of your immediate family that may have seen you speak or have read what you've written. Where did this journey begin? What was the spark of all this innovation, and who may have been the inspiration along the way for you?
So I think that, we talked a little bit about sort of innovators and having an innovation personality. So I think I'm actually an entrepreneur at heart. There is nothing I love better than new ideas and building new capabilities. And, I think for me, the journey probably began when I had the opportunity to run my first startup, which was spun out of Stanford School of Medicine. This was a big challenge for me. This was a risk. I didn't know how to run a startup, but I also had a great mentor. As I've moved from being an innovator myself to more of a supporting innovation a role and leading innovation, I've actually become also very inspired by the innovators that I've worked with, and that's a lot of what's kept me
Fuels the
engaged and
tank.
excited.
Yeah.
What?
Fuels the tank a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. When I was uh, chief innovation officer and even vice president of innovation, I love to be in the flow of ideas. At Boston Children's Hospital, there was just no shortage of new and creative and fun ideas to think about. But there are also great innovators that I personally took inspiration from. There was a doctor at Boston Children's Hospital who had tried over 300 different ways to oxygenate blood with nanoparticles to provide oxygen to someone whose airways were obstructed. And this is such an important need. And I was so inspired by the fact that he tried for 299 times and kept trying because he had 299 failures before he got to something that actually worked. And I thought, this is a great innovator. This is the type of person I want to work with. This is a role model for all of us. There was a urologist at Boston Children's Hospital who really modeled sort of putting himself in his patient's shoes when thinking about innovation and trying to understand their needs. He was actually a very early adopter of virtual visits post-surgery, and he sent some of his patients home with a robot that could facilitate virtual visits. He also built an app that patients could use in the hospital to access lab results and connect with their care team, and even just find out who had come into the room, what the name and the role was of people. And in the app, there was a picture, the name, the role. So patients became much less confused. And what was great was this doctor put himself in the patient's shoes and built and innovated from their perspective. So I really had the privilege to work with some amazing innovators. I've worked with students, first-time innovators. And for me, I love the can-do attitude. I love the passion that innovators bring to the creation of new ideas. And I'd say that's what's motivated me and propelled my career and made me want to get up every morning and work on innovation.
Wow. Such a truly inspirational story in innovation. And many people don't know, but you are also very incredibly generous with your time. You've been noted for your thought leadership and participation in several advisory boards. How important is it to you and to anyone who's in a leadership role to really ensure a balance in all things, paying it forward with your leadership and some of these extracurricular activities?
Mario, I'd say I've been extremely blessed to have a really fascinating career, great mentors, inspiring innovators. I also think it is really important to help others. Innovation is very much a team sport, and people should be helping others. I'm currently working with MassBio. I'm on their digital health, new digital health accelerator advisory board. I personally enjoy rolling up my sleeves and working directly with startups when I can. Most of my work, as I mentioned, is focused on large healthcare organizations, but I've been privileged to be on the advisory board for ResApp, which is a publicly traded startup in Australia, and NQ Medical here in the US. And I personally find that I actually learn a tremendous amount by being involved. Though I'm supposed to be the expert and providing guidance, it's really a two-way street. And I think, teachers will say they learn the most from their students. I feel like I also learn a tremendous amount from the folks that I work with and I advise. So it's actually a pleasure to pay it forward, as you say.
Oh, and it's so critically important that we do that, and we're going to do that right now because certainly there's some young women that may be out there listening that may be thinking about pursuing, or like my two daughters that are actually pursuing their undergraduate degrees in biology. Others out there like yourself may be pursuing a degree in chemistry or some other areas of STEM. What's your advice to them?
Well, I guess I would say my advice is to follow your passion, whether it's pure science or maybe like me, you'll move into a management or startup role, but really to be comfortable taking risks and to believe in yourself. And I would say it's really important to try new things and to stretch and not to be afraid of things that you haven't done before. And I feel like in my career, I have repeatedly tried things that maybe I wasn't initially qualified for, but I try to reach and stretch and learn and build my human capital. And I'll share with you, Mario, probably my first biggest stretch came very early in my career. I had my PhD in material science. I moved to California. I'd had a baby. I was getting back into the workforce. And a friend of mine knew I was looking for a job. And they actually introduced me to the dean of the Stanford School of Medicine. And I mentioned that I was involved with this startup. Let me tell you a little bit more about how that actually happened.
Yeah, please.
So the dean was interested in potentially spinning out this new technology that one of the faculty had developed. And she actually asked me when I was sitting with my friend if I could do a market evaluation. And I said to myself, okay, I've never done anything like this before. So I said to the dean, of course I can do a market evaluation. I just kind of went for it.
Oh, market evaluation. Yeah, that's great. I'll do that.
Yeah. So based on my market evaluation, and I would say the sort of passion and excitement that there was, they actually asked me then to run the business. And so they said, one of the things they were going to need were content licenses. So they asked me to arrange content licenses, to
Which you were also an
revenue
expert
model,
at that point, right?
hire developers.
Sure.
And Mario, I said to myself, wait, so have I arranged any content licenses before? No.
Hundreds.
Zero. Have I ever developed a revenue model before? No. Have I hired a developer before? Nope. The only thing I'd actually ever done before, Mario, in business was a market evaluation for that company. So of course I said yes.
The springboard to the future.
I'd be happy to arrange the content licenses and hire developers and create a revenue model. This turned out to be a huge stretch for me, but it also was an amazing opportunity. It was an amazing chance for me to learn all sorts of new skills. It was a stretch. And so I went from being a newly minted PhD in material science to the CEO of a digital health startup. And it was a critical transition for me. It was a transition into business. And I just want to encourage your daughters and anyone else, even folks later, in their career, to go for it, to stretch, to try new things. You will not be sorry.
I love that. I fully embrace it. I shared with you a while back offline that I am a coach of youth basketball and have been literally since eighth grade, which is the first service project I ever ran. But with my daughters growing up through the years, I've always coached girls softball or girls basketball, and always trying to give them, not too much. I'm their coach. I'm not their dad. I'm not their friend. So it's a very interesting position to inspire them, to either go hit the ball or go hit that free throw. And I've always been looking for, what is the best way to encourage them in the classroom or in relationships. And certainly I will pass on your words of wisdom to them or tell them to come and listen, at least to this part of the interview, because I think it's so important that people also feel that confidence, with that confidence of, I can do it. I may have never done this before, but I'm going to try and I'm going to adventure and I'm going to do my very best that I can. And it's only through that type of embracing and that struggle where we actually even learn and look at where it has led you by saying yes and diving in. However fearful you may have been at the time, however little confidence you had in your ability to get that done, you were confident in yourself. And I think that's so critically important for young girls today, for anyone at any point in their career. And I think it can be so debilitating. And I've seen the effects of it, literally both in children in sports and adults in business. If you don't have that confidence in yourself, you've got to believe in yourself because no one else will. And take that risk. We invite you to take that risk. I'm going to ask what's happening next potentially with you. So I'm going to put you on the spot. And I think based on everything that our viewers have seen and heard in these last minutes together, what are your personal and professional goals at this point? What would you love to accomplish next?
Well, I guess I want to continue to really be an advocate and a support for digital health in pharma. I think that industry is in transformation, but there's a lot of work ahead, and I want to continue to write and speak about that. I also am very much advocating for more digital health programs and really more innovation programs in hospitals where there's so much need for innovation and change. And I really believe that formal innovation programs with the Chief Innovation Officer can transform any hospital. It doesn't have to just be an academic medical center. And I personally am excited to support more innovation challenges. These are particularly complex to do in the pharma industry where there's a lot of regulatory guidelines and boundaries. And so I'd love to do more work in this area. And I also I want to work with a few more startups. I love supporting startups, thinking about the business model, the regulatory strategy, if that's needed, the financial model. It's really going into brand new territory, and I'm not, running a startup myself right now, although that may be in my future again, because I do have.
Well, you kind of sort of are with that consultancy you have.
I am, but it's not a digital health startup per se. So
that's true.
This is a way that I sort of get to address those passions and that sort of feeling of being an entrepreneur at heart.
Dr. Naomi Fried, it has been a pleasure to speak with you. Let me open up the floor to you for the final word.
My final word is just thank you, Mario. This has been really a wonderful conversation. I appreciate all your questions, and it's really been an honor and a pleasure to have this time together with you to talk about what are some really important issues and the transformation that the healthcare industry really is going through with digital health and with innovation.
Well, I'd also like to thank you for coming on and telling us all about you and your story, your road to success, how you have also pivoted along the way in terms of being able to move and understand some of those errors that have been made. And no better takeaway message for everyone here than certainly the story that you shared about that individual from Boston Children's Hospital who tried 299 times, and it's that number 300 where you can potentially get it. So you know what? There's a lot to be learned. You don't get it right on the first time. That is a key lesson learned for all of us. And you know what? Persistence pays off, and you need to dedicate yourself to be innovative, if for nothing else than yourself. Because if you sit, you're going to stagnate. That's for certain. For the New Right Network, I'm Mario Nasinovich. To access this episode and other on-demand programming from Celt on Health, visit newrightnetwork.com. The right voice right now. Thank you for tuning in. Stay informed and stay healthy. Welcome to the Healthcare Voice on the New Right Network. This is Celt on Health with Mario Nasinovich.